Hey, what's up everybody, this is Mewth24, and this is part 1 of my Gundam Experience series. As I mentioned before, just in case you missed the preview section, basically this series is going to be all about my experiences with Gundam, and when I viewed the series, what my feelings toward them are, and sort of how they rank on my overall Gundam favorites. Now, for the first series here, I'm going to be doing just the alternate universe shows, reason being that I haven't completed everything in the Universal Century. I still have to watch the original Mobile Suit Gundam, Double Zeta Gundam, and finish up Victory Gundam before I can do that. So there may end up being some overlap later down the road if I finish those before I've actually finished doing this entire Gundam Experience series. But for the most part, do expect that these will be alternate universe series. And with this first episode, I'm going to be focusing on 3 different Gundam stories, 2 of them tied together. I'm going to be focusing on G Gundam, Gundam Wing, and then Endless Waltz. And the reason I just have Endless Waltz Wing 0 there is because I don't have any other version of the Wing Gundam or Wing 0 from Gundam Wing. So he's representing both series for this video. And so I'm going to start off here with G Gundam, and I guess the first thing I should mention is that, like most North American viewers, I did find myself introduced to both G Gundam and Gundam Wing around the same time. They were 2 of the first series that I knew anything about, thanks to Toonami coming, onto Cartoon Network and kind of bringing all these different anime shows to North America. Now, one thing you might find interesting is that I actually watched a few episodes of Gundam Wing before I found G Gundam and 8th MS Team, and those were the first 2 series that I completed all the way through. But Gundam Wing, I watched a few episodes of it when it first came out. I knew a lot of friends who were big into it. That and Dragon Ball Z seemed to be the 2 big ones at the time. And I just really couldn't get into it when I was like 11 years old when I was first watching this stuff. Part of it was the Victorian era theme they had going on mixed with the giant robots. That really wasn't doing it for me much. Also, I really wasn't that keen on the characters. And so I didn't end up watching Gundam Wing until much later on. Actually, it was a few years ago that I watched it all the way through properly. But G Gundam I did watch all the way through, and this was actually before I watched much of Dragon Ball Z, and I kind of was really into the hyper-fighting robot action, as ridiculous as it was, but I thought it was really cool to take this in a direction of a fighting tournament all around the world and have every nation have at least one mobile suit to represent them. I'll admit it did seem like it got a little bit muddled later on when they tried to introduce the Dark Army stuff and the Devil Gundam, and I was really more in it for the World Tournament stuff. Now, it did have some of my favorite characters in the entire Gundam universe. Schwarzbruder is still one of my favorite Char clones to this day, but even the rest of the Shuffle Alliance I always thought was really cool. I mean, I wasn't huge on the Rose Gundam, but Gundam Maxter, Dragon Gundam, Bolt Gundam, Shining Gundam, and God Gundam, I loved all those designs and the pilots that went with each of them. Now, I do admit that the series had its very cheesy moments, especially when it came to like the dialogue between Rain and Doma. It just got to be super sappy and melodramatic at times. But I do think that as the first departure from the Universal timeline, this was really a success just because of how bold and different it was. And also the fact that even though it was goofy in a lot of respects, the team behind it seems to have recognized that and just sort of played that to their strengths. It's not a series that's as serious as the other Gundam series, but at the same time you don't feel like you're supposed to take it quite as seriously as other Gundam series. Which I think is a perfect place to transition into Gundam Wing. Now, as I said before, I didn't watch this all the way through when it came out stateside originally. I waited until a couple years ago to watch it through, and the reason behind that was because I decided, after revisiting 8th MS Team and watching Stardust Memory for the first time, that I wanted to go ahead and watch every Gundam series ever made. And Gundam Wing was one that I actually kind of wanted to get out of the way early because my impressions of it were kind of poor from before. But I also figured, you know what, I'll give this thing a fair chance. I'll just kind of go into it neutral and, see what happens. And it's a very different series from the G Gundam stuff, where that was hyper-fighting action, Dragon Ball Z inspired stuff. Gundam Wing is sort of a more fantastical and stylized take on the Universal Century formula. It's not like it's tied directly to the Universal Century, at least not in the degree that something like Gundam X would be, but it does have that more militaristic and tactical feel to the combat situations and just the story overall. while I really did enjoy the way the series set up, I felt like very quickly it became repetitive. The plot points were just running in circles, and to be honest, I didn't really like any of the characters in the series, which was really disappointing. There were a couple that I kind of enjoyed. I enjoyed Duo and Ketra as two of the main leads there, and even Tro was okay. But Noin was the other character that I actually got to liking quite a bit in the series, and we don't see that much of her in Gundam Wing the series. You know, she's there in the beginning, but then during the second half, she just kind of shows up when it's convenient and then doesn't really show up that much at all. Trey's was interesting, but he monologued way too much. Lady Un was annoying every time she showed up, and I could not stand Hero for the life of me. He was the most bland and annoying lead character, I think, in the entire Gundam series, if I'm being completely honest. You never really got a sense as to whether he was, you know, this hardened soldier type, or as to whether he just honestly didn't give a crap about anyone else around him. They never really make that very clear, and I think that was just the reason that I didn't like him at all, was because you never get a clear-cut sense as to why he's so stone-cold and serious all the time. And that's one thing I've always kind of wondered with the Gundam Wing fanbase, is just why this has such a strong following. And to me it feels kind of like it's just nostalgia, more than the actual series itself, because I know a lot of people who like remember it as being a great series, but also haven't watched it in, you know, however many years it's been since it first debuted in Toonami, which I can kind of understand that, you know, being the first Gundam series that you really like it and stuff. But at the same time, like, having just rewatched it a few years ago, it's really not that strong of a series when compared to the rest of them. And is actually one of the weakest Gundam series, in my opinion, at least. But at the same time, I do feel like it had its important role when it came out, and I can't really deny its role in introducing so many people to Gundam and just anime in general. Now, I felt the complete opposite, however, with Endless Waltz. I felt like that was such a much stronger story, partly because it was self-contained, but also because they had a lot better character development. The pacing was darn near perfect, and as a whole, I feel like it's one of my favorites of the Gundam movies. Now, I do realize that with Endless Waltz, they sort of just threw in some new characters that weren't in the original series for the sake of having a story that could continue after the Gundam Wing storyline all wrapped up and stuff. But I do feel like they work pretty well with the old cast, and one thing that I love about Endless Waltz is that it's so accessible for both fans of Gundam Wing and people who aren't fans of Gundam Wing or have maybe even never seen Gundam Wing beforehand. Like I said, I didn't watch Gundam Wing back in the day, but I did watch Endless Waltz when it was first on Toonami, and I felt like I was able to jump in and know pretty much what was going on the entire time, even if I didn't have as much of an appreciation for the storyline as someone who watched Gundam Wing all the way through. One thing I really did like, now that I've seen Gundam Wing all the way through, is that they work so much better on the character development in Endless Waltz. As I mentioned, Duo and Ketra, still probably my two favorites in Endless Waltz, but I actually enjoyed Hero as a character. You see a little bit more of him come out, and he feels like a very human character in Endless Waltz, which is, I think, is kind of crazy to think that, you know, I got that sense of a believable character from him in like an hour and a half film that I didn't in an entire almost 50-episode series. Anyways, everybody, that wraps up this first episode of this series. Do keep in mind that these are just my opinions on the series. I'm not really trying to sway anybody one way or the other on their favorites and stuff. And if you want to start like conversation down in the comments section on, you know, what your favorites were, you know, what you felt about these series that I presented here, feel free to do that. Next episode, I will be covering Gundam X and Turn A Gundam, the next two series in the alternate universe timeline, and I will be going through all these in the order that they were released. So that'll probably follow chronologically, with the exception of Seed Stargazer happening sort of out of timeline with Seed Destiny, but for the most part, they should all flow in both chronological order of release and chronological order of when they happen in their respective timelines. Do expect that episode will probably be out next month. I'm going to try and do these about a month apart from one another, just so that I can keep it balanced with my other videos, and then that way if I run into a bunch of stuff outside of this that I have to do, you know, I can work on that as well. But that's pretty much it for this first video, and with that, I will see you guys next time.